It's been a big week in terms of international affairs, Australia's relationship with the world and the geopolitical debate in our region. I want to bring in now former Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs, Mike Pezzullo, to talk about all of this. And there is so much to canvass today on this Friday as we assess the week that was, look to the week coming, and there is a big week coming as well. But I want to start with the Trump assessment at the White House with Mr Albanese there about the balance, the military balance. He says they're way ahead of China. Is that right?
Well, good morning, Kieran. I thought that was actually the most telling comment. It was a very successful meeting. There's no question about that. That's been well covered through the week. But a lot of the assessment and a lot of the interpretation of the meeting, quite understandably, was from a very parochial Australian bilateral point of view. Completely understandable. What Mr Trump said about China, though, was, I thought, the most fascinating thing. He said several things. One, we're going to compete with them, hence the critical mineral rare earth issue. They don't want a stranglehold on, they don't want a Chinese stranglehold in that critical area. So for them, it's about great power competition. The Secretary of the Navy said something really interesting that we might come back to. The deployment of Virginia-class submarines to Perth is about power projection. Yes, it's about helping Australia get its own capability, but it's really about projection of power in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. You don't often hear that from Australian officials or ministers. And then, of course, what Trump said, I thought most tellingly, on Taiwan. Essentially what he said on the military balance is this. Yes, China wants to absorb Taiwan, whether through a military attack or otherwise. I don't think they'll do it. They certainly won't do it on my watch while I'm president, and they won't do it because I've got a good relationship with the president. But in any event, we're so strong militarily that itself will deter China. It's probably true if the Americans can concentrate all of their military in the Pacific. Then I think they do have an edge. We don't really know because until, regrettably...
That's a big if, though, isn't it?
It's a big if. Unless you ran it live, and no one wants to run a live war, you'll never really know. You can do some simulations.
So it's that close?
I think here's the problem, Kieran. They have to distribute their forces. So you see them supporting NATO around in the Northern Atlantic and the European theatre. You see them going into the Middle East, often to either protect Israel from missile strike or to take on the Houthis, for instance. Every time you do that, you've got to move bombers, you've got to move fighter jets, you've got to move your aircraft carriers. It dilutes what you can deploy in the Pacific.
Can I ask you, underpinning Trump, as you said, sanguine when it comes to Taiwan, is that because deep down he won't fight to stop a Chinese takeover of Taiwan?
That's often said about the president, that because he places so much of an emphasis on being a peacemaking president, it'd be contrary to that narrative, if you like, to think that in one case he'll want to start a war. I think it'll come down to their assessment on the day or on the night before the day of what are their key interests. Unlike some of these other conflicts, where America doesn't really have a very direct interest, it's often about protecting someone else. Here, the question that the president of the day, whether it's Mr Trump or subsequently, would have to ask, is it in America's interests to see China so dominant in the Pacific and the Indian Oceans? I think that's a more open question than what people might imagine.
When you say that, though, and I want to get you to elaborate on that if you can, because if you're in the Trump mind, it's hard to guess what he's thinking, but he's the non-politician, non-traditional political leader. He's the real estate developer, TV person who's made himself an extraordinary, as you said, peacemaking is a big priority for him. He doesn't want confrontation, and he looks at this island off the coast of China, which is so close to China, you can see it. Would he think, the logic is not there to go in and try and defend it?
Possibly, and you read accounts in John Bolton's memoir, H.R. McMaster's memoir. They both served as national security advisors. Bolton particularly recounts a story where the president looked at a map and he said, look, it's so close to China, why would I bother? To your point. But he also understands power. And in a circumstance where, either by default or through conflict, either way, China was to become as dominant in the Western Pacific, not only would they potentially then secure Taiwan with the basing that gives them and also access to semiconductor chips, but also threatens Japan, and it also, frankly, casts a pall over Southeast Asia. Do you reckon in that world, do you seriously think in that world countries are going to stand up to China, including in terms of blocking their goods and their services. Imagine, you recall in Australia the 5G decision of a few years ago. Imagine a debate in this country or in a Southeast Asian country with a dominant China around 6G technology or 7G technology. How do you think that would go? And I think part of the American calculation would be it's more than just Taiwan. It's also about dominance and it's about supremacy. And I don't think they're going to let up on dominance or supremacy as lightly as what some scholars think.
This next week, you spoke about the positive reviews for Mr Albanese and that meeting that he had with Donald Trump. Much anticipated. It went smoothly. Went better than I think anyone could have hoped it would in terms of AUKUS, in terms of critical minerals. Could well have some more face-to-face time next week at both the ASEAN Summit and the APEC Summit, which looms as a really key moment for world affairs with Trump and Xi Jinping to have a face-to-face.
Well, look, on the bilateral front, I think the Prime Minister's now set an excellent platform, and full credit to him, his office, his department, also Ambassador Rudd. I think the work that's gone in behind the scenes over months has set up a really good platform. I have to say, and touching on the issues we've just canvassed, I think there's still a difference of view about how to think about the Pacific. I think from Australia's point of view, we'd like to stay out of a lot of this great power competition and potentially confrontation. But if you heard Mr Trump carefully, what did he say, for instance, on defence spending? Well, of course I'd like you to spend more, but we do so much together, including in relation to our militaries and other areas we can't talk about. Probably a reference, we don't know, to intelligence, space, communications. They see us as a vital partner in deterring China. So going back to the conversation we just had, that's where they see the value, and hence the reference, for instance, to the Virginia deployment into Sterling as being part of that. So I think whilst we've got a great platform, we've cleared the air on a lot of things to do with AUKUS, there's clearly no going back on AUKUS now, I still think there's a difference in philosophy about how to tackle China.
And on the Trump-Xi Jinping meeting, which is the big one next week?
It is the big one. I think they'll focus mainly on trade. There's a lot going on behind the scenes to try to land a trade agreement, whether they're going to have high tariffs remaining on China or whether they can do some sort of deal. I think it's inevitable, and sometimes we'll never know because this will be classified potentially and kept in confidence. They might well have a discussion about security in the Pacific. They might well broach that very topic. Look, we don't want to fight. We don't want to fight over things like Taiwan. How do we build confidence and how do we build dialogue to avoid the threat of war? It's going to be a fascinating week. I know you're travelling and you'll be there in a ringside seat. It's going to be a really fascinating week.
It is going to be an interesting one to watch. And finally, on that projection piece that you spoke about with the Virginias, the submarines, this is a reminder for those viewers that are watching on AUKUS, it is not all, a decade and beyond. Some of these submarines are coming through within a couple of years.
In fact, when I talk to my American friends and when you get an American perspective on AUKUS, the Sterling deployment is actually their number one priority. Yes, it's great that Australia's...
That's within a few years, 2027.
Infrastructure is being built now at HMAS Sterling, so it's still going to be an Australian naval base. It's not going to be an American base, but it will be a forward operating location for the most capable undersea weapon in the world, the Virginia class. If anyone thinks, and you might have thought this at least prior to the meeting on Monday, that the Americans wouldn't be looking to use those capabilities in a war, God forbid if it ever came to that. Well, the US Secretary of the Navy, John Phelan, dispelled that. He said, this is a critical point of access for us to get power projection into the Indo-Pacific.
Mike Pezzullo, great to see you. Appreciate your insights. Thanks so much. Lots to discuss, as I said.